Yes, maybe. Dear all, welcome to this webinar. Good afternoon. Today and tomorrow we'll focus on this issue, culture and jobs, rescue, support and unleash. And this webinar series organized by the OECD together with the European Commission Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sports and Culture as part of the Creative Europe program. And today's event is hosted by Glasgow City Region and Scotland Skills. And we thank our partners we were very grateful for hosting us, and although virtually, we would have all loved to go to Glasgow and have an event there. So today and tomorrow we have quite an exciting agenda. We want to understand a bit better what's the impact of the current crisis on jobs and skills in creative and cultural sectors. We all know that this impact was devastating, but it's already been almost 1 year in many countries since the introduction of the first lockdown measures. So let's have a look at what are the current trends. We also want to see what are the tips and tricks to better measure the jobs in the sector. And also we'll discuss how policies can be better adapted and how can we fix them so that they really serve the needs of creative professionals and firms. And then we'll also have a series of case studies, and we'll see how different cities and regions and projects address the skills needs of the sectors and support employment in the sectors. So this is the agenda for today and tomorrow. And now I'm very pleased to introduce Fiona Hislop, Cabinet Secretary for Economy, Fair Work and Culture, Scotland Skills, who will be providing a video welcome address. And once again, thank you so much for our Scotland and Glasgow partners for hosting us.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. Of course, you're hosted today and tomorrow. A warm Scottish welcome to our international participants. The current pandemic may have restricted opportunities for travel, but it doesn't mean that we can't still engage with each other in a meaningful way. Of course, you're hosted today and tomorrow by Glasgow City Region, a region with a strong heritage in the promotion of culture, creativity and innovation. It is 30 years now since Glasgow was European City of Culture. You may also be aware that Glasgow became a UNESCO City of Music in 2008. You may also be aware that Glasgow became a UNESCO City of Music in 2008, building on its reputation as a globally recognised music venue. And clearly concerts are not currently taking place, but it does speak volumes that the SEC Hydro, which opened in 2013, was the third busiest music venue in the world by 2016. Likewise, the Celtic Connections, Glasgow's annual Folk Roots and World Music Showcase, was described in pre-COVID times as Europe's biggest winter festival. And we have a vibrant grassroots music venue scene. We've been supporting that through emergency COVID-19 funds, as they are so vital. We've been supporting that through emergency COVID-19 funds, as they are so vital to the growth of new bands and artists. All good reasons why Time magazine should describe Glasgow
So it looks like the gods of technology are not with us today, but of course the address of Fiona is available on our website and also on YouTube, and we will circulate it to everyone right after the session. The OECD wanted to provide some welcoming remarks, and I now turn to Karen Maguire, who is the head of the OECD Local Employment, Skills and Social Innovation Division. Karen, please.
Well, hello to all, and sorry about these technical challenges, but just to reiterate our thanks again to our hosts in Scotland, and in particular the Glasgow City region. And we can at least still try and imagine, but I know that we would have heard a little bit more about a number of the historical achievements of Glasgow City region, and also the number of designations it's received in a lot of fronts in terms of culture, music, and they're really engaged activities. So hopefully we'll be able to learn more about that when you hear the address on YouTube. I just wanted to also say, we're really pleased to do this seminar as part of a project in collaboration with the European Commission. As Katia mentioned a moment ago about the agenda for the next couple of days with a focus on employment, just to give a little background that this is part of a series. Last month we talked a bit more about cultural participation and what that can mean for our health, well-being, all sorts of important issues, inclusion. In addition to today and tomorrow on employment, in the future, we'll also be looking at issues of SMEs and public and private investment in culture. So this is really, this next couple of days is really part of a much bigger initiative here at the OECD that we're working on in collaboration with the Commission. And so the OECD, just to highlight, is working on culture and creative industries through its local employment and economic development program. And the reason we do that is because ministries of economy, employment, social development, regional development, all of them are very interested in what can they do to help capture the potential of culture and creative industries on a number of different fronts. And so the OECD's approach is a very cross-cutting approach in understanding what it is about these sectors and what they can bring to our economies and societies. And why do we also have this local accent in a lot of our work? It's really just because when you want to see where the connections come alive, how people interact, where they live and work, where they visit cultural activities, how different forms of innovation processes take place, a lot of this requires people's presence, physical proximity. Of course, we're seeing a lot of activities can happen digitally, and there are technologies to try and replicate this as much as possible to have the real experience. And culture and creative sectors are doing a lot on that front. But it is really an area where this local accent is critical. And so what we try to understand a bit is how national policies can provide the right frameworks and supports and incentives, and then understand how local governments can then take advantage of that. And we do that through thematic reports, practical guides, knowledge sharing like today's and tomorrow's discussions, and even special capacity building events such as an annual summer academy on culture and creative industries. So, this discussion, when we initiated this project, COVID was not yet on our radar screens. And since then, of course, we've had to really think about as a society what it means, culture and creative industries. And the OECD has done a note on our COVID-19 hub to try and understand a bit more what are the potential impacts in different cities and regions in terms of employment and other aspects. And then how can it be, how can we ensure that creative workers and firms don't fall through the cracks as we are engaged in this massive recovery effort? And then how can we better capitalize on culture and creative industries in the recovery? This audience, of course, is well aware of the incredible economic and employment footprint. And in some places, Seoul, it's 5.5% of jobs are in culture and creative industries. Studies have shown that in London, one of every 6 jobs is in the creative economy. And all of these figures are even, in some cases, not taking into account all the related employment in the supply chains and the secondary employment in the sector. And I know we'll be talking in the next couple of days about important efforts to better capture and measure this. And of course, when you start to see these figures, and I think this is where, helping to educate the wider audience. I mean, these are numbers that are bigger than what you can see in some countries for automotive or agriculture. And it's something where the awareness raising that we can all do will help in that effect to show really how critical and vital this is across different policy sectors. And of course, right now, there are some sectors that are particularly affected more than others, venue-based sectors, and then some digital sectors, of course, are booming right now. However, what we want to make sure of, and one of the areas of OECD research, is to understand how to ensure that that full culture ecosystem doesn't get irreparably harmed by COVID. How do we make sure that all of the micro firms, nonprofits, self-employed creative professionals are able to ride this crisis and then participate fully in the recovery period. So we are, of course, trying to look at policies to help ensure that these kinds of opportunities remain after the crisis, and that we are trying to figure out how to address the fact that we're going to have perhaps a lack of investment in future production and potential decreases in revenues, whether it's from philanthropy or from even subnational expenditure, which in the area of culture, recreation, religion is the vast majority of public expenditure generally in countries. And so we are here to support different policy initiatives that will help ensure that the sector continues to thrive and is further capitalized on in the recovery. And this is an area where we hope that the crisis, if there is a positive here, it's that it's really shown how important it is for our economies and societies, that these are sectors that help make us happier. They're sectors that help make us healthier. A lot of the literature on engaging in culture and creative activities can support a lot of our mental and physical health needs. How it can really contribute to inclusion in a number of different ways. And again, on this innovation front, how it can help us become economically as productive as we can. And so tapping into this for the recovery and emphasizing this is going to be very important. And we recently at the OECD had a big discussion with all of the OECD ambassadors to really highlight how important it is to think about what we can do, how we can use digitalization as a positive game changer, how we can promote crossovers between culture and education using different digital tools, how we can take advantage of this great potential for health and well-being, which will also create jobs associated in the sector and new kinds of ideas, folks that are skilled in health, but also creative sectors. And of course, there are already examples of this around the world, but it's an area that could be greatly expanded, and how to rethink as well large-scale tourism and more sustainable models, building on culture and creative industries. So we're really pleased to have these discussions over the next couple of days, and we look forward to taking back what you say as we develop our different policy toolkits and our different reports. And we really just want to thank again our hosts in Scotland and Glasgow City Region, the Commission for this really exciting collaboration, and some of our other partners such as the World Cities Culture Forum, Eurocities, and the International Council of Museums. So thank you again, and look forward to the very dynamic discussions over the next 2 days.
Thank you so much, Karen. And now I wanted to ask Maciej Hoffman, our colleague and partner in Brussels, not so far away from Paris, in the European Commission Director General for Education, Youth, Sports and Culture. Maciej, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katja, and thank you very much, Karen. I hope you can all hear me and see me. Perfect, perfect. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning or good evening, depending from where you're joining us. My boss, Susanne Holman, from the Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture, has already briefly welcomed the participants at the previous session on the music sector that we had an occasion to take part in. But I would like to maybe develop a bit on some of the aspects of the things that she mentioned. And first of all, of course, express our happiness for this collaboration with OECD, but also we are very happy to be hosted virtually, unfortunately, given the current circumstances, by Glasgow City Region. But I hope at least that the spirit of Scotland and of Glasgow will be visible throughout the event, and they will be able to learn a lot from each other. As it was said earlier by Susanne Holman, we're very happy to use this occasion to share projects, programs, best practices, and examples that come from the EU, but of course also from beyond. And I'm also very happy to see among the participants many familiar names and colleagues from European Commission services that joined us. This was also the case for the previous seminar. So again, we're very happy that we can help and fuel each other's work, us in the Commission and the colleagues in the OECD with these exchanges. But of course, what's very important is that we also want to learn and to share with cities and regions. In the European Union and in the Commission, we very much recognize the role that cities and regions play when it comes to experimenting, innovation, and bringing in change. And this is something that is very explicitly recognized in the new European Agenda for Culture of the European Commission from 2018, our key document that defines the priorities of European Union cultural cooperation. When it comes also to the EU context, we're in a very, very special moment now. Following the successful adoption of the European Union budget for the next period of 7 years this last December, we already have some new programs in place. And as it was said by Karen, it's a very special context in which we have to think about recovery and resilience efforts that are ahead of us. If you look very specifically at the EU budget and what's available, you might be familiar with European structural investment funds, which make roughly 1/3 of the EU money for this period of 7 years. And the idea of this money is to reduce disparities between regions across the European Union. And of course, in the current context, a lot of the discussions are around the question how strategically invest that money, but also how strategically we could invest that money in culture and creative sectors to help with the recovery. It is also the same with so-called recovery and resilience facility. This is unprecedented in the European Union's history, with the EU putting at disposal of member states more than 670 billion euros in grants and loans to help them with again, structural reforms and recovery efforts all across Europe. Member states are currently negotiating with the Commission when it comes to what's going to be included in that reforms. And these are, of course, the ongoing negotiations, so we cannot disclose too much. But what I can definitely say is that we already see that member states do want to invest in culture, from reforming their working conditions of artists, working on skills of culture and creative sectors. They want to invest in heritage and cultural infrastructure. So there is a lot, I think, to learn from each other, and there's a lot also that we can take possibly from projects like this one, with OECD and the Commission joining forces. So with this in mind, all of us are looking very much forward to what's going to happen during these 2 exciting days. We'll be here and we'll be also happy to contribute. And then, of course, we're looking to the continuation to this project and all the other remaining activities that still remain for us to be done this year. So again, looking forward. Thank you very much, and very happy to be here. Unfortunately, virtually, but we're making sure we can use this opportunity, and let's hope that the gods of technology, as Katja said, will be with us during this occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maciej. And yes, let's pray that the gods of technology stay with us. I wanted to invite also our participants to feel free to post their questions or maybe to share examples of their own work in the Q&A function. And we'll try to pick some of your questions during the sessions. And we'll also try to disseminate interesting things after the webinar. So now let's go into this thematic session on COVID impact on jobs in the cultural and creative sectors. Of course, there were a lot of webinars over the past few months, and I think we were one of the first to start this series of webinars worldwide back in April. And of course, we all know that cultural jobs are very much affected by the current crisis, along with tourism. These are one of the most affected sectors for obvious reasons. What we would like to do with this session is, in fact, not maybe to repeat so much what we already know, this dramatic effect, but see what's happening right now, because it's been already 1 year. So how the trends have been changing over the past year. And we also want to see how creative jobs will be different after this crisis, and what are also the opportunities. Are there any new job creation opportunities that are emerging from the crisis? So this is a little bit the idea behind this session. And maybe to kick off, I wanted to provide a very brief overview of what's been happening for the last few months. Yeah, maybe the next one, please. So we all know that the impact is very dramatic on jobs in the cultural and creative sectors, and especially the venue-based sectors are affected, and this has dramatic impacts on revenues, jobs, not only in these sectors, but also throughout the value chain and in creative sectors and in non-creative sectors as well. And we also are seeing that the impact is quite heavy on cities, because many cities around the globe were, before the crisis, really were quite proud to be hosts of a vibrant creative economy. So now they are suffering quite a lot from the current situation. Maybe next one, please. Yes, maybe one of the things to underline are the very specific features of creative jobs. And maybe it's because of these specific features that the impact is so dramatic. So the crisis really highlighted the structural fragility of the sector. And of course, we all know that there are very important shares of non-standard work in culture and creative sectors. These jobs are very often quite precarious. At the same time, they're very highly skilled. They proved to be resilient after the previous crisis. And of course, they are less prone to be replaced by automation or delocalized. And they also rely on these very dense ecosystems. When a person can work for a public cultural institution, but also as a freelancer for a commercial firm. And so it's very important to have this ecosystem approach in mind, because if we don't care about the freelance professionals, it will have a tremendous impact also on the large firms that are present in the sector, or on the public cultural institutions as well, which all rely on this vibrant ecosystem of freelance professionals and micro firms. So because of these specific features, jobs in the sector and people in the sector, they have difficulties to access income support, self-employment or business support measures. So, and we see these difficulties throughout the past few months, despite the very massive rescue packages that were introduced by countries and cities. We also see that in many cases, the public support to culture is channeled to cultural institutions and doesn't always necessarily reach cultural professionals. So we also see that people in the sectors very often lack safety nets. And of course, we can't say it more, cultural employment is very difficult to measure. And of course, measuring and knowing what is the size of your creative economy is very important. And we were saying this also in the past, of course, but now it became a very practical issue, because cities, regions, government departments, when they introduce rescue packages, support measures, they want to know, so what is the target population for this measure? Can you tell me exactly? And well, in many instances, it's very difficult to say who will be the target population of this measure. So it is really becoming a very, so if it was one thing that was good about this crisis, is that this very increased attention to much better evidence to measure the sector. So yes, maybe we can go to the next one. And unfortunately, so in the next two slides, I will share maybe a bad news and then a good news. The bad news is that we think that the effect of the crisis will be quite long-lasting. And this is because of this bad combination of several factors. Of course, there is this continued income and revenue losses. It's been 1 year now that people don't have contracts and they are really struggling. So that's becoming really too long. Another important thing is this reduced investment in future production, once again, because of the cancellation of different festivals and book fairs, etc., where writers, actors, designers sell their work and conclude deals for future production. The cancellation of these events means that there will be this reduced investment felt only now or in the months to come. And of course, we can anticipate that there will be a likely reduction in public spending. And this figure shows that in the OECD countries, a large proportion of public spending is done by local governments, by subnational governments, up to 60%. And their budgets are really becoming more and more under pressure. And we can also anticipate some of the reduction of private funding from philanthropy organizations, individual givings, etc. So because of the combination of these different factors, we are afraid that the effects of the crisis on cultural employment and the sectors more generally might be long-lasting. But the good news is that, of course, well, in every crisis there are opportunities. And opportunities maybe also with some job creation potential as well. And these opportunities are related to this incredible push for digital, which is clearly not temporary and will stay and expand in the future. It is also, these opportunities are also related to crossovers between culture and education, culture and health, with potentially new professions and new skills that are emerging and will be in demand in the future. And of course, as already highlighted by Karen, there are all these crossovers with tourism. They have always been there, but maybe now many cities and regions are reconsidering their development models and trying to move away, for example, from mass tourism into a more sustainable scenarios for their tourism development. And of course, the overlaps, the crossovers between tourism, culture, and creative sectors can lead the way there. So maybe that's a bit of an overview so that we start with this sort of a picture in our discussion. Maybe I can stop there. And as another background piece, before we kick into the panel discussion, I wanted to ask Anna Rubin, my colleague, who is the author of the our flagship publication on local job creation, to provide a bit more background on what's happening now, more generally, what's the impact of this crisis on employment in OECD. So Anna, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. If you can hand over control for the, actually, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen directly. All right, can everybody see that now? All right, well, great, thanks so much. I was really appreciative of being invited to be in part of this kind of important conversation. And as Katya said, what I want to do now is just spend a few minutes kind of zooming out and talking about some of the broader employment impacts of the crisis as highlighted in our recent publication, Job Creation and Local Economic Development 2020, Rebuilding Better. So it's been said by many people, but I think it's important to stress that the employment impacts of this crisis just in general have been massive. So the chart on the left compares the reduction in hours worked in the first 3 months of the COVID crisis compared to the first 3 months of the global financial crisis. And what you can see here is that reduction in working hours was 10 times greater as a result of the COVID shock from the 2008 shock. And of course, this is just looking at the period in the spring of 2020. So this has changed a little bit since then, but this just gives you a sense of the kind of massiveness of the scale of the crisis. And of course, it's kind of been a little, all countries have been hit, but some countries have taken particularly hard hits. So the chart on the right shows, for example, that looking at OECD data, countries with comparable data, Italy, Canada, France, and the UK have taken particularly large hit in terms of the loss of working hours. The most recent estimates the OECD has on the unemployment rate come from November 2020, and it puts the OECD-wide unemployment rate at about 6.9%. But of course, this is before the kind of recent wave of lockdowns and containment measures we've seen in recent weeks. And so it's likely these numbers are already out of date. And this brings me to an important point, that even just getting our heads around the scale of the employment impacts of this COVID crisis is really difficult for a number of reasons. For one, we're trying to understand the impacts in a really rapidly changing context as containment measures phase in and out, as countries go in and out of lockdowns. And our traditional labor market surveys just aren't good at capturing these kind of real-time and rapid changes. There's also really important differences between countries in terms of how workers in different kind of classification and different types of employment statuses are classified. So for example, when we look at workers on short-time work schemes or who have been furloughed, some countries count them as unemployed, some count them as employed. So getting kind of internationally comparable statistics is really difficult. And then finally, we're seeing more people drop out of the labor force altogether. So a lot of the impacts are not people moving from employment to unemployment, but people moving from employment to inactivity. And so our traditional kind of unemployment rate as the gold standard in labor market health really isn't good at capturing what's happening in this crisis. As you've talked about, as you're going to be talking about today, some sectors have been particularly hard hit. In a lot of ways, this translates into kind of different impacts within countries. We're still collecting subnational data for a lot of OECD countries. It's not yet available. But so we're just going to look at the US here as an example. And this is looking at the unemployment rate through September 2020. And what you can see here is that unemployment really spiked in Nevada, it hit over 25%. In Hawaii, it reached over 20% in the spring. And these are really the kind of two big tourist destinations in the US, so Hawaii and Las Vegas. We also see that in New York, California, and Illinois, which have the biggest metropolitan areas in the US, unemployment remained elevated kind of through the third quarter of 2020. And as I said, we don't yet have subnational data for all OECD countries, but we are seeing similar trends in other countries where data is available. So for example, in Paris or in France, participation in the short-time work schemes was highest in the Ile-de-France, the Paris region. And in the UK, London has the sharpest decreases in online job posting compared to other places in the country. So this goes back to some of the things that Katia just mentioned about kind of this concentration of job losses in cities because of the concentration in some of the sectors that were hardest hit. I want to spend a few minutes just talking about how this crisis is the same or different than previous crises, because I think this impacts how we can think about what worked in last crises and what may or may not work this time around. So as you've seen, the scale is much deeper and the timing is much more acute this time around. It's truly a shock, not just kind of an economics shock, but really a shock to all of our systems. It's also hitting places and sectors differently. So cities also took big hits in the last crisis, but they also rebounded more quickly. And this time around, it's just not clear whether they're also going to rebound more quickly. What's also interesting in terms of these sector dynamics is that a lot of places use tourism to pull them out of the 2008 crisis, especially in places like Spain, Italy, and Greece. And that's actually made them more vulnerable this time around. So you're not going to see a kind of tourism-driven recovery necessarily this time as we did last time. Looking at the people affected, the usual suspects have been hit again this time around. So I'm talking about low wage, low skilled workers and workers in non-standard employment, as Katia mentioned. We're also seeing youth have been particularly hard hit. So for young people kind of graduating this year, that means the chances of finding a job or even an internship right now is very difficult. And for some of the kind of older peers in that cohort, they're actually facing their second crisis in kind of the formative stages of their working lives. What's a little bit different this time around is that women have taken much harder hits than men. Men are typically hit harder during recessions because they're kind of concentrated in industries like construction that take kind of short-term hits. But this time women tended to be overrepresented in some of the service sectors that took hard hits. Also, as we see schools and childcares remain closed or reclosing in many cases, it's often women who kind of take on the responsibility for unpaid work at home. And this is why we're seeing kind of large shares of women dropping out of the labor force altogether. And this could really have long-term impacts on their career prospects. Going back to Katya's point of kind of not just what are the short-term impacts of COVID on the labor market, but how might this change jobs for the long term, I think it's important to keep in mind that the COVID shock comes on top of kind of an undercurrent of broader labor market transitions. And I just want to talk about a few of these very briefly. So thinking about automation and digitalization, research suggests that regardless of the recession or the downturn, automation tends to speed up. Employers tend to invest more in technology during these times to kind of and invest less in low-skilled workers. And of course, the specific nature of the COVID shock means we might be facing kind of a hyper acceleration of automation. There's some low-hanging fruit in terms of kind of automation that can be integrated into workplaces quickly, but more capital-intensive automation may take, up to a decade to fully come to fruition. So these are kind of changes we're going to see immediately because of COVID, but also over the long term. Of course, the expanded use of teleworking and e-commerce is kind of here to stay. We had a lot of people thinking about, we're all going to be working from home 100% of the time after COVID. I don't think that's the case, but it is going to change some of these kind of dynamics in terms of the geography of jobs as well. COVID could also accelerate the green transition. We're seeing a lot of countries, and of course in the European Commission, putting a big focus on the green transition in their stimulus packages, and we're seeing expanded public investment in green infrastructure. But we might also see a tension between kind of preserving jobs at all costs and transitioning carbon intensive sectors. So there might be a little bit of force kind of pulling in both ways here. And then the last two I want to talk about is globalization and urbanization. Even before the COVID shock hit, we were seeing kind of stagnation in the growth of global trade and a rise of protectionist policies. And of course, COVID kind of caused global trade to plummet in the first half of 2020. It was recovering by the second half, but we're also seeing a lot of countries kind of putting in place relocalization policies as part of their stimulus packages, especially for kind of strategic sectors like healthcare or health equipment or personal protective equipment. But whether these are just kind of little blips or a broader trend, again, remains to be seen. And, I hate to keep saying we just don't know, but we are operating in a time of radical uncertainty, as everyone likes to remind us. And so I think the same thing can be said for urbanization. In 80% of OECD countries, the share of the national population living in urban areas has increased over the last decade. But now you see a lot of people questioning, is this trend of urbanization going to continue? We hear a lot of anecdotal evidence and kind of headlines and flashy newspapers about people abandoning cities and the death of cities. But when you look at the actual data, for example, on real estate prices or vacancy listings, the evidence is still a little bit more mixed. So we don't quite know what's going to happen to cities. But we will likely see a shift in kind of the patterns with even in cities, as we know that teleworking will stay a kind of permanent feature of workplaces in the future. So we might see an expansion of suburbanization or kind of people moving to second tier cities that are an hour or two away from trains from kind of their large employers. So I know that was a lot of information in a really short time, but I hope it helps put kind of your discussions in a broader context. And I'm here if there are any follow-up questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anna. Yes, this was very insightful. So now let's go into this discussion with this very rich background. I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers. Anita de Bayre, Director Pearl, Live Performance Europe, Frédéric Martel, Academic Director of the Zurich Center for Creative Economies in Switzerland, and we hope he will be joining us shortly. My colleague Pierluigi Sacco, Senior Advisor on Culture and Local Development for the OECD, and Janice Kirkpatrick, OBE, Designer and Creative Director, Graven, Scotland and the United Kingdom. So, well, we had a bit of an overview. So maybe from what you heard in terms of impacts of the crisis on cultural employment, what do you want to add? And maybe we can start with understanding a bit better what is so special about these jobs in cultural and creative sectors in terms of forms of employment, maybe motivation, and do these specificities vary somehow across non-profit, public and commercial parts of the sector? So maybe I can turn to Anita and then to other speakers. Anita, what's your take on this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Katya, for the invitation, and very happy to be here part of the panel. It's a great honor for us. Well, to respond to your question, and I think the introduction was very rich and already said a lot of elements that I also would like to bring up. I think it's very important to look at the entire ecosystem. I mean, if you look at employment, if you look at the employment and labor market, we also have to look, of course, to the offer of employment. We have to look at what are the structure of the companies. In the sector I work in the live performance sector, I would say it's an SME sector. It's not a sector of big companies, except, and unfortunately it went bankrupt. The Cirque du Soleil, for example, in Canada, which is a big, or was a big employer, employing 4,000 people. But besides that, you would have rather the big public institutions like opera houses, which may employ up to 1,000 people. So nothing compared to big companies that exist in the economy. But what we have is that there is a growth of companies, mostly micro-sized companies and one-person companies. So if you look at those figures and try to get some statistics on that, you will see that there is a growth on that side, which of course has an effect on the employment market. The Eurostat figures about 1.2 million in the live performance sector. We think there are issues there with the calculation. We think there are more people working than actually are calculated in the sector. So of course, this is the subject of the next panel, but it is definitely a discussion on kind of pointing out how many people are actually working in the sector. The other topic is, as you mentioned, is the economic context. It's a very varied sector, the live performance sector. It has the very kind of public notion, but also the non-profit, those that get subsidies or grants for specific productions. And then we also have the commercial. There's a very kind of interlinkage between these sectors. The commercial sector couldn't live without the public sector. The commercial sector often uses the public sector as being the place where performers get their training, and then they move to often more commercial productions. But there's also the understanding of how a rhythm of in this sector works, that it's very difficult to make profits in our sector. Even a West End show, it may take 52 weeks before it turns break even. So just that as an example. Then it's the specifics of what we produced. We make our products in Europe. We don't do delocalization. We are not kind of putting certain makings in other outside Europe. It's really locally made. And although the teams might be very international, what you do is produced inside Europe. So in other words, and it's the more model, our costs do not go down when we do more shows. They just remain as much as they exist. So it's a very kind of labor-intense sector, and the automation that was mentioned is going to be rare. Now, the international aspect, the reference was made to globalization. We are a sector that is highly mobile. We live by the fact that we can tour. It's a very important source of income, of employment. And without that mobility, a lot of people would be without jobs, as also is proven at present, as there are travel restrictions. And then a last point that I wanted to make in this context of this question is education. We have seen an immense growth. We are a very popular sector. We are a very young sector. Let's say since the 80s, 90s of the past century, there's been more and more training offer, more and more education offer on the artistic side, on the technical side, on management and marketing jobs. This has grown, and that has given an immense influx on the labor market, where you get all these young people very eager to do things, very motivated, but where, of course, you have to see where can they find their place, which are the theaters, the venues, that can program them, and when they are young, they're not known yet, so it takes time to build up their reputation. So there's a lot of factors there that all together make that there is a lot of pressure on the employment, so the young pushes out the older ones. So that's also what explains often that the average age in our sectors is rather low, and as was mentioned, it's also a sector where people are very highly qualified. It can be on the basis of their education, but it can also be just on the basis of their training. I mean, no reason to explain that a ballet dancer at the age of 18 is at the height of their skills, and nevertheless would be considered in the general notion as being just someone with rather low skills. So that also has to be taken into consideration when considering the aspects of employment. So I think I kind of wrapped it up. Hope I leave enough room for the colleagues to also bring in their input, but this is from the perspective of the live performance sector.
Yes, thank you so much, Anita. And yeah, you covered quite a number of issues. One of the takeaways for me is indeed what you were, I mean, what you were saying is that live performance sector was quite booming, no? Over the past 30, 40 years. There was a lot of interest from people to enter into this, and even the training and skills provisions were very much aligned to serve these growing needs. So it was really a booming sector on all sorts of dimensions.
Indeed, I mean, just look at the number of festivals that have been created. There are more and more festivals in local communities, and they are a very kind of important element in also the local employment. So they generate also quite a lot of attraction to tourism, but also they provide a lot of local employment there, and that just also shows how interesting and rich this sector is, full of creativity, but yeah, you have to give it a place.
Absolutely. So now maybe on the same question, so what is so special about the jobs in cultural and creative sectors in terms of forms of employment, business models, motivation, and do these specificities vary across cultural, across public, non-for-profit and commercial sectors? I wanted to turn to Frédéric Martel, from the Zurich Center for Creative Industries. Frédéric, bonjour, bienvenue. So what's your take on this? Maybe you need to unmute. Maybe you need to unmute, Frédéric. Oh, we still don't hear you. Can you unmute, please?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I just said since I'm sorry, I was at the Zoom problem link. If you just, I can just conclude after the next speaker because I need to be in the debate since I just arrived, and I'm sorry for that. I will speak a bit after the next speaker.
Yeah, very good. Well, let's do that. Basically, maybe just as a recap for you, we wanted with this session to understand when we started to discuss, of course, what's the impact of the crisis currently, and how the crisis is changing the creative jobs of the future. And now maybe with this same question, I can turn to Janice. And so what's your take on this?
I think it's a really incredible time that we're in today. Glasgow's creative innovation over the last 300 years and 3 industrial revolutions has been amazing. But I'm not going to quote statistics because right now it feels like we're in the eye of a perfect storm. We've got COVID, climate change, we're in the middle of the 4th digital industrial revolution, and we're also faced with the chaos of Brexit. There are no jobs. There are no jobs. There are only opportunities and there are problems that need solutions. And this fact makes creativity and creative skills more important than ever. I can't imagine a time ever in the last 300 years when we have needed creative professionals as much as we do today. The issue is, I don't think our economists, our accountants, our policymakers understand what these creative professionals do and what they can bring to solving the problems that we now face. We need ideas right now. We don't need analysis. Yesterday has happened. We've got to stop staring at it. It's like a rear view mirror. Creativity creates value from nothing more than grey matter. It's our most valuable natural resource. In a way, you know, the entry level for any entrepreneur today is grey matter and sweat and some friends, some networks and connections. That's all you need. So if we can get young people, school children, people exiting further and higher education, a little bit of creative process, it can give them the security to stand on their own 2 feet and to feel that they could join together and maybe have a go at creating a hopeful future for themselves. What I find frustrating is being in endless meetings where skills organisations and government keep telling young people that they've got to get better at filling in CVs. They've got to, you know, apply for jobs that don't exist because it's not truthful. It's not truthful. I think the very best we can do is be honest with them and give them what they need. Creativity is really interesting. Creative professionals are very resilient. I keep getting told that, you know, art people, you know, they're very fragile, they're very delicate. Actually, they're the opposite. They're the toughest of the lot. They're very entrepreneurial, and all the entrepreneurship business courses and the fancy universities around the world are based on design process. That's what they're based on. They're collaborative, they're connected, and change is their natural habitat. Change is something I deal with every day in my professional life, and it's my happy place. I was given the skills to find comfort in chaos and to look for order, and all humans have got these abilities if we're taught to use them. And now is a time, I think, to use this opportunity to get back to basics and give people some of the simple things that could change their lives. I think what we're in danger of losing right now, because we're always shoved in this, well, I am in the UK, shoved in this box called creative industries that keeps me, my skills and my business. And I've been in business now since I set up my business when I was in art school 35 years ago. It keeps me in a box away from the other industrial and business sectors where I can actually be useful. It stops me being a lever in helping other sectors pivot. And over the last 20 years, I've watched creative industries actually fail to gain the kind of traction it really should. And I think we should actually look at it afresh. I think creative outputs are essential. They're essential to connect with the economy because they are fundamentally about value creation. They create gravitational pull that underpins all economic development. It creates attractive environments for inward investment, for education, for visitors and residents. It creates successful communities and places. And creativity feeds on and enriches culture. You know, it's through that that we renew ourselves, our architecture, our streets, how we interact with one another. It's the lifeblood of everything. It's what it is to be human. It adds value to everything. And creative economy strategy, I love creative economy because it brings creativity together with economy. I think that's really important. It changes the conversation. Creative economy strategy revitalizes inert or overlooked assets, organizations, communities, and skills. And in a city like Glasgow, this is really important because we have, within the public sector, the largest and one of the finest civic collections in Northern Europe. And right now, it sits in the liabilities column on the balance sheet, which is mad, because if it's allowed to be recalibrated and looked at through the lens of creativity, we can actually reorganize how these assets are used, how they're viewed, join them up and get some economic activity, some community activity, you know, well-being, all these incredible things can flow from it, but it requires getting them out of the sectors and policies in which they're crystallized, they're confined by them at the moment. We really need to change our thinking. The world has changed and we need to remake it anew. And you can't change tomorrow's world, you can't create tomorrow's world using yesterday's institutions. I realize how hard it is for large organizations, particularly public sector and large corporate organizations to change direction, but they must. Actually, I think the future is going to come from the smaller places, from the small SMEs, which governments hate because they're just difficult to deal with. There's so many of them and they're all different. But actually, they're the ones that can move very quickly. And they're the ones that are actually regrouping at the moment. I'm playing with people I've never played with in my life before. I've had the most amazing conversations and connections all over the place in the last 6, 7, 8 months. There is hope. But we really need to be at the heart of economic development. We need to be viewed as a source of wealth creation and not a liability. Heritage also needs to be not viewed as a liability. I really think we need to reconsider how we join creativity up with the rest of our industrial sectors. I quite often look to the past as well, because I think it's really important to look at other times of chaos, and Glasgow in particular was the crucible of the first industrial revolution, and it was involved at the leading edge of the second and the third industrial revolutions. We didn't have economists then. We didn't have analysts. We didn't have data. All we had was what was in front of our faces. So we really had to deal with the world as it was in reality. And we managed to do that. And I think that the connections were really important in doing. This was the era of coffee houses and pubs and social structures in our cities and in the countryside. Actually, the countryside was on fire with innovation as well. So let's not forget there are some really clever people in farms and villages who would greatly benefit from being part of conversations like this. But it was through these social structures that allowed us to have different kinds of conversations. Sectors confine us, silos confine us. The fourth industrial revolution and all this change will come in the overlaps and the grey areas between them. And if we're not having conversations with people other than ourselves, this will not happen. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jenny. It's a very passionate plea. And I liked very much, well, yeah, yesterday had happened. So let's not look backwards, but let's go forward. And I also like very much that you underline that, yes, creative jobs, well, and creative professionals are resilient. We have data for this, and I think, well, testimonials like yours are very powerful in that. And you also had this passionate ideas on how policies can be improved, and we will try to address this in other sessions. But it's maybe a key message is that, well, heritage culture is not a liability, it's an investment rather. And of course, you underline all these potentials for innovation and for new product design, etc., that can come from heritage if it's not just stored somewhere in a box, in a storage. I don't know, Frédéric, would you also like to say a few words about what is so special about cultural and creative jobs, and what are the specificities of employment models in these sectors? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Janice, to to speak before me. It was better for me to get the impression about what how the debate is going. Just a few remarks. Basically, we at the Zurich Center for Creative Economy in Zurich, even though I'm in Paris right now because I'm in a lockdown, we decided very early on, which was in March, April last year, to interview more than 100 artists around the world in artists that we already interviewed a few years before on a totally different subject, but to get a kind of the same panel. Of course, it's more qualitative than quantitative. And in addition of that, we also look at the data made especially by the Swiss government on artists. So we combine qualitative research and quantitative research, and we publish 4 notes about the COVID crisis. And the title of the 4 notes was Sleeping Beauty. I mentioned that because actually that's the case. That's sleeping, but that's beauty. It means it's still beautiful, and we still have a lot of artists doing great things. However, some of them are sleeping, are not able to show their production. That's my first remark. The second one, and to answer a bit more precisely your question, Ekaterina, it's the sector we are discussing is both impacted in the same way than every sectors and in a different way. And in addition, within our own sector, different components are also affected differently. So there is 3 levels in the debate. And I'm a bit against this idea that we heard quite often, you know, it's terrible for the artists. That's not true. It's terrible for some of them, not for all of them. And when we do the qualitative research, we see that, I mean, not so many, but a large percentage of them are in fact in a better way now than before. Why? Because when you're a writer, I don't want to personalize, but you know, for me, the situation is better. I have time. I can write on my books. I don't have to do conferences that are time consuming, that are expensive. You have to go abroad. And a lot of people in the visual arts, in the writing process, in the architecture are sometimes much better because of their time. They can work in their own, they can experiment, they can do research and development. Of course, it's a small part. And I don't, of course, want to generalize, but you have also some sectors that are much worse. So we need to be extremely careful when we analyze this sector about the diversity of the situation. And I would say, so first of all, everybody is affected in the same way. I mean, lockdown, sometimes you get unemployed, and the situation is also very different from a country to another one. In France, where you're unemployed, you get basically the same amount of money than when you work, and you don't have to work. So, I mean, the situation in this case is not so bad. When it's getting bad, it's when you're not an employee, which is the case of a lot of artists, because they are not, but we also need to know that the very vast majority of the artists in many countries have a regular job as an employee, and in addition, they are doing their own job in the art, and it's just a small part of their salary. So then they still have the regular job and not have the little job that is much more artistic. So first of all, we are in a way the same than the other one. It means general consideration about the arts for all the artists, in the same way than all the population. The second element is the specificity of the creative world. And then I agree with what I heard by Janice and the end of the previous person who was speaking. We are a different world than the general population. Much more, much less full-time job, not as much full-time employees, much more erratic kind of level of salaries. 1 month you get a lot of money, the months after, and maybe for 6 months you don't have. So it's a very different way of making money. The same, the other element, we are much more working home than the other people. So for a lot of creative people, working home is the basic of their work. At the same time, and that's the third element, depending on the categories, the situation is extremely different. Of course, when you live mainly by live events, performing theater, performances, and everything that is physically active, you are in big trouble. And in some countries like France, the salary of the people who were supposed to work on a play were basically maintained when they were working in the public system. That's not the case when they are in the private sectors. We have also some elements, I don't want to go in the details, but that basically help the theater people and the live events people getting a regular salary all the year. And it depends on the number of hours that you have worked the months before. We call it intermittence du spectacle. This system has been protected by the government. So it means basically for the artists which are intermittent du spectacle, the vast majority of the people in the theater, in fact, they don't have to work and they still get the unemployment money. I know that's very different in other countries, but in this case, if you speak to a theater person that was already intermittent du spectacle, that the situation is better for him because he doesn't have to work, and he can prepare, he can work. If he's a playwright, for example, he can write, he can have a lot of time, but he still is paid. Of course, if you were not an intermittent du spectacle before, then of course the situation is a disaster because you cannot enter the category and you cannot have the benefit of the intermittent du spectacle. That's again very specific to France, but I wanted to mention this element because it shows that the situation can be very different. In the movie theater, in the digital sector, the pictures is also extremely variable. It depends a lot. We have seen in our interview that for many people working really in the startup mode and in the internet sector, the economic model is much better right now for them than before. For video games as well. For in the media and advertisement, it depends a lot. You can have some increase of basically number of view, but you have also a decrease because of the ad failure. In visual arts, it depends also of the situation. An artist that is just paintings and selling his paintings, actually he can sell because the galleries are basically open. And in any case, his economic models works on several years quite often. So in a way, that's that's not so bad for him. If you're a young artist up and coming and you're just entering the sector, then it's extremely difficult because you cannot be heard, make your case and be known and so on. Architecture, the situation seems not so bad in general, but of course a lot of delays in the work process of the building the things. However, as you know, in the architecture world now, you're paid in general just for the plans you make in the beginning. So for that, you're still paid. And even though you don't have the money in the other part of your revenues. So once again, and I don't want to be longer on that, but I just wanted to show that I'm a bit against the idea of it's terrible, we need to find a solution for everybody and so on. The situation is extremely diverse, extremely different. I would like to add and finish with that what is much more important, and I totally agree with Janice for that, for example, is when we speak about the creative economy, you cannot just discuss the life of the artist. I would say I made a small study just about Avignon, which is a city in south of France, which is one of the main cities for theater. And we have seen what did happen this summer because of the cancellation of the theater festival. Of course, the artists, the theater people were in trouble, even though, as I mentioned before, in the theater of Avignon, everybody is intermittent du spectacle. So basically, in terms of money, they didn't lost money. On the contrary, because they didn't have to work, they were able to do something else, and they still get paid. However, the second round around the artistic world and the third circle were in extremely big trouble. And at the end, we showed that the city of Avignon was basically destroyed by her economy, its economics, because of the cancellation of the theater festival. It means people just working on security, building lights, electrician, informatician that works on stage, light people, the people, just all the students that in general are working to make host the people coming and so on and so forth. That's the second circle. And then the third one, which is not related to the place, but it's also a lot affected, are of course hotels and restaurants and cafe, and even the photocopy guy where you were printing your poster to make publicity for your play. And also in Avignon Festival, we have 1,000 play every day, basically. So it means more than 100 of buildings that are rent, and also all the apartments that are rent. So basically the economics of the city of Avignon, which is a small city, has been destroyed. And quite often a month of festival help people to survive for several months. So the disaster of the creativity failure is a disaster for the city at large. And I think it has also to be taken in consideration. To finish, we need also to see that a lot of elements will be a consequence on a long term. Again, if I take the example of theater, but it's true also for live events. In general, when you do a live event, when you do a play, in general, in a normal country, you pay rights. No, you pay the artist, you pay a lot of people, but you also pay rights. And these rights will be given to the artist in general 1 or 2, sometimes 3 years after the time the special society of music right or theater rights are able to do the accounting and pay back the artist. So the consequence, for example, of the failure of the festival or the music scene will be seen in 2-3 years. We also need to take that in consideration on the revenue. That goes to the a worse situation with this element. And to finish in one sentence, I will say, I'm a pretty optimist guy and a positive one. And I also, during the interview we have made with artists in many countries, we have seen also a lot of hope. An artist is somebody that needs to think about his work. He needs also to think on the long run what he wanna do. It's also you need a lot of time of research and development, experimentation, trying, reading. I mean, either as a writer, as a musician, as a theater, as a playwright, as a visual artist, you need all this time that in general is not paid, but will help you to create great art. And in a way, this moment of months without being able to show your art is also a positive thing to experiment, a chance to refine, rethink, redefine your art, and sometimes just to do it. I mean, to paint, to write, to write a play. That's not good. That's of course a bad situation for everybody, and especially for the artist. But I trust them in general, with a lot of cases where the situation is much worse, but I trust them, and there are probably much more opportunities to take in account this time to build something with that than somebody working in a supermarket or just having a small company that is totally in bankruptcy right now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Frédéric. So you really underlined that the situation is quite complex now, and we need to recognize that there is this diversity of situations across sectors, obviously, across publicly subsidized, commercial and non-profit sectors and people employed there, and very much also across countries, depending on the regimes that they have. And you mentioned the intermittent de spectacle, which is a rather supporting type of policy to maintain the artists' living and working conditions. And just as a reminder, maybe related to this, it's very interesting to see the recent European Commission study on the working conditions of the artists, which provides really a panorama of different policy regimes that across Europe that support or not so much support artists. And then Frédéric, you also mentioned this, it's very important to understand how income is generated by creative professionals, and you underline that the effects might be very long lasting because of the rights payments that will only kick in later on, or the loss of investment because of cancellation of all these different festivals and events and book fairs. And it was quite dramatic to hear the story of Avignon. I think the conclusion was quite expected, but it's still quite dramatic to see that, because it's a booming, it's a star city, in terms of theater. Everyone wants to be in Avignon.
On that, we have known that for a long time, that there is several circles, but now we have the proof, and so we can discuss that later with the Ministry of Culture and other actors to say, that's not just us; it's also the people around.
No, absolutely, and that really underlines this value chain that well, these waves that are created by a very cultural creative event and then go beyond, much beyond the creative sectors. So maybe it would be great now to have another round of reflections to understand. We've already started to discuss this, but maybe how this crisis is different from the previous one. Well, maybe if you have something more to add on what's the impact on the jobs today. Yeah, voilà. So Anita, maybe you would like to add a few words here now?
Yes, thank you very much. And I think Friedrich also already said a lot of things characteristic to the live performance sector. And yeah, adding to that, I think when we look at the impact of the sector and of the crisis on the sector, I think we also have to consider that whilst we are in a standstill, which is unprecedented. We did not have that in the financial crisis. We went on, even if times were difficult, even if public financing was reduced and it was just kind of the starting trend of a continuous decade of, for many countries, not all countries, but for many countries, to reduce the public investment in culture and the arts. This is very, very different. I mean, the reason is different why we are here, but also because there's absolutely, except a bit for the summertime and for certain countries where the pandemic was hitting less citizens, there we see that absolutely coming to a standstill has its effect. I don't know if you have seen yesterday's study published by JSAC, done by Ernst & Young, Rebuilding Europe. Clearly for the music and the performing arts sector, the figures are there. They say 90% less of revenues for the performing arts sector, 76% less for the music sector. They are at the heart of knowing what comes in from the collecting society's point of view. So it's reliable figures. But compared to other sectors, books sector, audiovisual, radio, newspapers, they're also down in revenues, but they are down with 20-25%, which is not so big as the performing arts sector. On the other hand, you see then the gaming sector went up. So you see the digital kind of developments. There it went up with 9% during the crisis. And these are EU figures for 28 member states last year. So I think this is really important to bear in mind, because it also has its effects on the companies, obviously. When you have no revenue, your running costs go on. At the moment, our sector and the event sector is discussing with banks to get a prolongation on the waiver for paying back their debts. It's only allowed 9 months. The 9 months is over. So there are these discussions happening. So we're going to see in 2021 that certain companies will have to close because they don't have the liquidities to do so. So I think it's definitely not a matter of crisis in the creativity. Indeed, it's not a matter of crisis in the motivation. Although you see, and I read in recent articles, there is a fatigue. Especially in the live sector, they want to see the public. They want to see the audience. They want to see the contact. They want to feel the contact, the vibe with the contact, having this vibe, being in, whether you are a rock band or you are a theater company, that relationship. And so it's understandable that artists are getting a little bit kind of, demotivated at the moment. But looking particularly in the connection to the employment and how the crisis has affected it, it has also shown, you're speaking of a sector which is characterized by freelancers, a huge freelance market, much bigger than in other sectors. This has also put the finger, of course, to how the societies are organized, how we find ways to find responses to people who work in that way and then get no employment. I had just figures out from PLASA, it's the International Association of Event Technology, where they were also saying, yeah, they asked the question, do you have any kind of orders for the next coming months? And most of them said, yeah, well, our order book is empty. So that just shows, and I also heard from dance companies who said we totally stopped the selling. Nobody is certain what's going to happen. So there's no movement. There's nothing happening. Everybody is in a waiting mode. That means that I just kind of diverted a bit of what I wanted to say, but I think that what we are confronted with is the way our societies, the system we are so proud of in Europe, our social protection system, has put the fingers to the gaps that exist. It's based on, that system is based on a long-term employment, permanent employment, and finding responses to people who work from assignment to assignment, from etc. So who have many consecutive contracts, makes it not easy. Frédéric mentioned the intermittent model as a solution. Yes, indeed, you are then in unemployment, but for those who are self-employed, if they are not having a real status in which they pay into insurance, etc., then indeed their situation is not obvious. And there has been solutions offered by the Commission, finding packages, support packages, the SURE package, the React EU package. But yet, even with these packages in the countries, I know my members had to really go and talk to the governments to find ways to really make sure that that support could go to the micro companies, the self-employed, etc. Now, there are people who, and I think indeed it's the artists are a particular category, the creatives are a particular category, because they are, for them it's a vocation. It's, you want to work as an artist. It's what you are. It's how you work. For those, the off stage, the technical people, the event suppliers, etc., it might be different. However, they're also kind of very motivated to work in that sector, because yesterday I was in a meeting with the music sector. We were talking about that immense drive that exists. You want to be part of, it's adrenaline. You want to be part of being together with these big names, etc. So you give everything. And then the question is asked, now in this crisis, what do you think? Are you considering to leave the sector? And it was said that around 20 or 25% are saying, yes, we would consider leaving the sector if we get another job, because you want to work. That's so much in their way of being, that, yeah, you rather work than be unemployed. But the other question, and that was interesting that they asked this, the other question was, when there's going to be reopening, when the businesses will resume again, will you then also consider to go back? And then nearly 70% said, yes, we would like to come back if we get the opportunity again. And in that context, I think we should underline that we have, yeah, I mean, in a way, we are lucky people. we have a wonderful workforce on which we rely. People very, like I said, very motivated, but also very skilled, artistically, but technically as well. And these are skills we wouldn't like to see lost. And there we work in very much kind of niche markets. Some of them are highly specialized in their areas. They're asked all over the world because they are very kind of experts in their fields. So we are very kind of worried about the loss of skills and how are we going to get those skills back? How much time will that take? And this morning I heard a very interesting model, and it's also mentioned in the study on the working conditions of artists that was published by the DG Culture, is a system that is set up in Sweden by the social partners. And you could say it resembles the intermittent system, but when the freelancers are out of job, during that intermittent phase, they don't call it unemployment, they call it salary. During that intermittent phase, they have a constant training. The dancers go every day for the training. The musicians get every day the training. They also have a role to play in the mentoring young people. So it's a kind of, whilst they are, you could say, unemployed, nevertheless, they are active. They keep up their skills. They also pass on their skills to the younger generation. And I think that is a very kind of positive approach to how you can find solutions to the periods where people get kind of without assignments or where there are gaps in the career. So I think, yes, we get good examples from different countries. They are sources of inspiration, and we have to build further on it. But yeah, the future is not ideal, and we will feel it definitely for many years to come. So yeah, unfortunately. And nothing alike comparing the financial crisis at all. But to end on the positive notes, in Shakespeare's time, there was also a pandemic, there was a plague. For 3 years, the theaters were closed. Theater hasn't died. We're sure culture and the arts will not die. So we are fighters. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Anita. So you highlighted quite a number of things, and also you gave very strong messages on the policy gaps that we will try to address maybe tomorrow morning in our session. And you underlined this issue of the loss of skills, maybe not so much related to the creative professionals, if we can call our artists, but more the technicians and the ancillary workers who, of course, to make a living need maybe now to shift to whatever other opportunities there. And will they come back? It was quite good to hear 70% said yes, but then let's see how the reality will be in the next few months. But we also see that there is this big push for digital. There is at the same time this loss of skills issue. So maybe I would like to hear from all of our speakers now. So how will this, how we call it, cultural employment, creative employment, look like in 2021, 2022? So with what are we emerging now from this, well, hopefully emerging finally from this crisis? What are the big differences? So what's, and maybe here I can turn to Pierluigi Sacco, my colleague, senior advisor for the OECD on the culture, creative industries and local development. Pierluigi, what's your take on this?
Oh, thank you, Katia. Well, I think that we are clearly in the middle of big transition, but I think that the signs of this transition were already evident before the actual pandemic crisis. The point is that clearly the crisis is accelerating them. I think there are several trends we should observe, and I will simply limit myself to list a few ones. One is, I think, the increasing impact on of the culture and creative professions in terms of potential social impact. I think that this is clearly one of the strongest trends at the moment, and it has to do, for example, with the already highlighted link between, for example, culture, health and well-being, and clearly in the post-pandemic scenario, the mental well-being crisis that we are facing will have a massive demand in terms of a new ability and new capacity to cope with the consequences of this crisis. And I think that especially in this particular field, the skills that culture and creative professionals could develop and that they are already developing in many sectors, I think could be of particular interest. The second point, which is related to this, is that of participation and community work. This is not something that is simply limited to impact. I think that there is today an increasing demand for communities to be involved in projects where they can actually tackle their own issues, for example, in terms of creative problem solving. For example, think of issues like accessibility for people with mobility impairments or other forms of impairment, how artists can be really the facilitators for this particular process, and how the skills and the languages of culture and creative professions can really, in some sense, enable to look to these issues from at these issues from a very different angle. So this is again something that I think in a moment in which we will have to reconstruct community bonds after the pandemic crisis, there will be a stronger demand also in this particular sense. The other point that has already been made, for example, by Janice, is we are already witnessing a massive integration of culture and creative professions within the broader economic context. So it's very important not to think, keep on thinking in terms of silos here. There is clearly an interdependence. There is a growing interdependence, and the share of culture and creative professionals that is employed today in non-culture and creative sectors, whatever the meaning of this definition that is more and more difficult to defend, this is, I mean, increasing not only, but also transforming quickly. So also from this point of view, I think that the capacity to establish a more active and more proactive dialogue with sectors that are not the typical sectors where this kind of skills and professions are employed, I think is another major issue. And then there is a problem that will have to do with the organizational models of the future. What we are seeing today is, for example, an explosion of smart working and teleworking. And we know already that when the pandemic crisis will be over, we will not switch back to the old normal. The old normal is gone forever in this respect. Of course, there will be a return to workplace environments, but in many cases, this will be a partial return. There is an overwhelming response, for example, from employees that they would like to continue with at least some forms of smart working. It will be difficult to ignore this. But from the point of view of organizational management, this will create a brand new problems, completely new problems. And again, what kind of quality can you create in a situation in which most people are working from home, or they are not physically coexisting in the same environment? This is another field in which we can expect a massive potential contribution from culture and creative professions in establishing, for example, a new ecosystem in which work motivation, corporate culture can be redefined in innovative ways. And going towards the conclusions, there are at least two other things that are very important. One is the redefinition of public space. So one of the aspects, of course, will be that with this explosion of teleworking, for example, the central business districts, as we have known them so far, will probably have to be deeply refurbished. There will be lots of space, and especially what is the public space around this. So I think that there will be, again, a very, very important connection between, again, many different forms of culture and creative profession and urban planning from this point of view, where we really have to reinvent this public space. And finally, of course, digital competencies, because clearly we have been, in some sense, mentally trained to think of physical and digital presence as something distinct and sometimes even oppositional. And the first reaction in this crisis has been to, in some sense, to upscale the dramatic gap between the physical presence and the digital presence. But the truth is that we were already, before the pandemic crisis, already heading towards a hybrid space in which the digital dimension and the physical dimension were already talking to each other. This means that in terms of skills, it will be extremely important in the future that every kind of culture and creative profession, even when, I mean, digital presence is not necessarily the core focus of the profession, will be able to connect to this hybrid system, this hybrid ecosystem that is shaping up. So from this point of view, I think that a massive investment in the upgrading of digital skills, and especially the deployment of potential, innovative potential in terms of how to use these new digital resources, will be another very, very big opportunity pool in the future. I think that's the main trends I would like to highlight.
Yes, thank you very much, Pierluigi. That's quite an optimistic view, no? Rather, so there are opportunities out there, hopefully, in the coming months. Janice, I wanted to turn to you as well with this question. So, what's your vision? How the creative jobs will be different in 2021, 2022?
Wow, I agree with everything that Pierluigi said. Absolutely everything. I would love to have a bigger conversation with him. I think there are some really interesting things happening. I don't think things are going to happen quickly. I think that the real imperative is that all of our organizations put pressure on governments and policymakers to really change. The biggest barrier to all of this is people getting too comfortable in their comfortable chairs and nothing changes. We really have to keep the pressure on. I see some things happening which are of great interest. I think the social impact is huge, and I absolutely get the way we're going to re-inhabit and reinvent our public spaces and how we use them, how we use green space, our relationship with the countryside and with the environment and with climate change. But I'm also interested in the way people have turned inwards and the rise in things like crafting. People have an innate requirement to make things. It's also drawing. I get very frustrated that drawing's not compulsory within schools because it's a language that's much more innate than mathematics or even spoken language, and most of our brain is concerned with image processing. And I've had very interesting conversations with a wonderful chap called Simon, who runs the Fraunhofer Institute at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, which is next to my studio. He's concerned with quantum and with nanophotonics. And he loves drawing. He thinks it's an amazing thing. My nephew, who's also in nanophotonics, asked me to teach him how to draw many years ago doing his PhD so he could express concepts. He could talk to himself in a different language. I think drawing and making are really, really important. And I think craft is also really important. I was at a very depressing conference a couple of years ago about the value of craft, and a big piece of evaluation that had been done by a London-based university that more or less said from an economic viewpoint, it wasn't worth bothering about because it was too small. And I thought that was quite shocking because the world's most valuable luxury brand right now is Hermes, leather-based organization with a market capitalization of 71 billion and 250 new craftspeople entering its ateliers every year. It's amazing. And I think that digital and the fourth industrial revolution need to get in about craft. One of the really big things that's happened in the last few weeks is the price of gold has broken $2,000 an ounce. And I know because we do a lot of work in the retail sector that the people who are working in luxury watches and jewelry are having the best year they've ever had. People are turning to old-fashioned things that have got permanence, longevity, craftsmanship, heritage. They are classic, they are enduring. And I think that the whole quality of making and crafting, if we look at that through the lens of the fourth industrial revolution and how things like digital and automation can take the arthritic pain from repetitive tasks, but still allow us to encode them with that kind of feeling of handmade, it is really, really ripe. And also, if you couple that with things like satellite technology, you can do things like verify the provenance of gold and of other precious materials, or you can track how leather is created. Is it sustainable? Has it good welfare and ethical standards? And there's so much around the material world. We're also working on a big project just now about onshoring the apparel supply chain in the UK. which is causing us to go back and look at the remnants of the textile industry that we have in the UK, where we still have Chanel and some of the big brands owning little Scottish companies because we can make buttonholes by hand perfectly. And I know that those of you who are in Italy and in France will understand, the value of a handmade garment and the couture industries and all of the wonderful culture, tradition, and heritage, as well as skill that goes and creativity that go into those things. So I think we're in an incredible time, and I am optimistic about it. It's horrible right now. And I think actually the biggest challenge is we're going to have to dig so deep because, pardon my language, but the shit has not yet hit the fan. We're still protected through government schemes that make sure that people aren't actually in their hundreds starving in the streets. But I see now that jobs are being lost amongst the professional classes, and it's going to get really, really horrible. So we need to find a way of focusing and just not losing our hope for the future and our plan. We need a plan. We really need to work together. And I really welcome events like this that allow us to connect, across countries, continents, to find solutions, because I think that design and professional creative people are very altruistic. I don't think we actually need to be rescued. I don't think we necessarily need support to survive. But I think what we really would value are the opportunities that would allow us to be unleashed on the wider economy, so we can actually help solve some of those big problems. So I absolutely welcome, more opportunities like this. Thank you.
Janice, thanks so much also for playing with our title. Indeed, unleash. It's rather the creatives, the designers that can help unleash the power of culture for greater economic and social impact. That's very much true. Maybe I can now also turn for some contributions from Anita and Frédéric. Once again, so what is your idea? What is your vision of how creative jobs will be different now this year and next year? So how we emerge from this crisis? Frédéric, maybe please.
The main debate and the main question for me, it's a question of is it just une parenthèse, a break, how do you say that in English, a break, a moment of a year that will be sleeping, as I said before, sleeping beauty, or because of this situation, we will see a deep change that will survive for a long time. I mean, for me, it's very difficult to answer the question for now. And probably, as usually, it's a mix of things that will be the same and things that will change. And also probably, for one part, the answer is trends were already getting in this sector, and they have been accelerated by the COVID-19, especially, of course, digitalization. And things will be not different, but we might have we might see these changes very quickly, and otherwise it would have taken 5 years or 10 years to see them. But once again, prediction are, I think, especially difficult in this sector. And again, it depends a lot of the subsectors. It's not the same in the writing world, where I assume things will be kind of normal pretty quickly, and very different in other sectors. I also want to emphasize the question of essential, non-essential. I think that's an essential question. We have seen, and to be honest, we understand that. I mean, when you have people dying, when you have a lockdown, and then we have the difficulty for many to buy food, that's kind of normal that the arts is not essential in comparison with the other elements. However, the fact that we have said that culture is non-essential, I would say by essence, that's, I think, it's a problem, and it's a difficult and wrong, probably, situation. And we have seen, on the contrary, that when people are at home, when they have much more time to for themselves than before, because they don't go out, they don't go to cinema and also restaurants and parties, and actually a lot of time they get for themselves. Culture becomes essential. And that's the debate of the quality of this culture, the debate of the choice of the culture you have in this case, the debate of curation, what kind of curation, what kind of recommendation. The gatekeeper are much more important in this case than in any other moment of life. That's also the problem of the debate between entertainment and arts, the debate between quality and quantity. Even though I'm not a purist on that, I'm pretty open to consider a lot of things being art and not just the art. But still, we have the debate about algorithm, about curation, about recommendations, and all these kind of things. To finish, I will say also, we never had an example like that in the past. And since the crisis is getting longer, deeper, we are now thinking of being back on the regular situation, not before the fall, maybe not before 2022 in some sectors. We need to I mean, on the long run, will be probably in the art sector one of the most important turning point and change in the history of the arts, at least for a century at least. And this is why we have made, I have wrote a long article about the WPA, the project that had been created by President Roosevelt after the crisis of 1929, the big economic crisis and the Great Depression that followed, that affected extremely strongly the arts in the beginning of the 1930s. And at the same time, the US government, for the first time in history, decided to invest millions of dollars to help the artist. Of course, I know the current situation is different. The situation of the artists is also different. But going back to that moment, looking at the WPA and the New Deal, Roosevelt social program that were mainly job programs, mainly employment programs. It was not cultural policy, it was a social policy. But it ended up being also an art policy because the artists were focus was done on the artist during that years. And I finish with another element, is training. It has been mentioned, it has been education and formation and schools. All these kind of things were mentioned before by Anita, I think maybe Pierluigi and Janice. You know, that's also something we need to look at, and also to maybe to insist on that. When you have time, and even when you're not young, we know an artist has to go back to school all his life. Training, it's absolutely necessary for the artist every 5 years, every 10 years, all the time. I mean, an artist by definition is always rethinking his art, regenerating his techniques. He needs more time to learn language, to learn, I mean, development language or just language, real language, or sometimes craft and tools. And I think the moment, and we still have probably a few months, maybe more, of crisis, focusing on training is extremely important. I mean, if we can help people, help artists to train themselves because they have the time, it's an opportunity then to transfer this crisis as training and learning period of time that is absolutely necessary for an artist. Even when he's an old writer like me, I need time to train myself on new subject, on new issue, reading books, whatever. So I think anyone has to be helped, not just to be an artist, not just to get money, but also in the current situation to be trained.
Yes, thank you very much, Frederica. Anita, what would be your take on this?
Yeah, well, thanks very much. my first reaction is when we will be able to perform again with a live audience. Everyone will be so eager. There will be, I think everybody will be so happy and eager to do again what they used to do. Although they have been doing also some performances now digitally online, I think that will be the very first reaction that will thrive through and be waved through the whole live performance sector. Having said that, though, the crisis has indeed brought the possibility for people to connect with audiences over the whole world, thanks to the digital means. So it has been opening up a possibility to connect with audiences all over the world. It may have had existed already, but yet, I mean, this is some new opportunities that arise. Not just about saying, oh, we record it and then we put our archives online. This has happened a lot. Nearly everybody has been doing that. They're all put there for free. So people have now a catalog, immense catalog available on the internet to watch that. What we are particularly interested in is in the creation of new types of creation. There's an interesting example of creative theater where they work with Zoom actually to create new types of performances where the people are also participatory in it. And we're sure this is just one aspect. There are many other different creations that can happen. And this is what we think is the area to further work on, to help to get this interaction between the audiovisual, the film, the gaming, the storytelling that is so present in gaming, with the specific aspects of performance, how that can integrate with each other, and we will get the emergence of new things. So it's, let's say that just purely putting there one or two cameras, that is not interesting. I mean, many people, sometimes they say, oh, there were so many views, but how long did people watch? After 10 minutes, you feel bored because you are not in the theater yourself. You're not experiencing it the same way. It becomes interesting when the audiences have their part. So we're very much going to look into that. Needless to say that it connects with the ecological thinking. There's a lot of remarks that were made in the first lockdown. Oh, yes, this puts us back to thinking. Are we still, how ecological are we? We who are a sector that is characterized by its touring, we should think of more other forms of touring. Slow touring is now the buzzword, but slow touring is not just going from one city to the other. It's also about connecting to the communities. And I think what Pierluigi is saying there is that connection with the communities is definitely going to play a role in the future. So I think there's opportunities there, and definitely things we need to look into it, to research, definitely also in the ecological thinking. We want to explore also what 5G can do for us, etc. So there's a world there that needs to be further explored, but for which we need, of course, the finances. But the digital, that's the tricky thing. Frédéric gave the example of the Avignon Festival. If that turns into something digital, you lose a lot of job opportunities for that local community. So there's going to be a tension there. And I think the only solution is to have the hybrid forms, to still have the live events where people are very eager to have that, where it creates also the whole kind of social possibilities for meeting each other. There's the whole stream of going to the restaurant before and then picking up a performance, and afterwards go together to the cafe to give your comments and critics. So that is definitely going to be a model that I think should also stay, but at the same time in hybrid forms with new opportunities, which also are able to be more inclusive. I mean, you can reach audiences, elderly people, you can reach people who are ill in hospitals, etc. So it gives a lot more opportunities than we used to have. And I think there we can expand a lot more. But digital is not just, people sometimes think, oh, it's easy and it's, oh yeah, you just need a computer, etc. No, you really need, and there you need the other sectors, you need the digital sector to be on your side, and it's mutual then. You work with the technology sector, the digital technology sector, in finding solutions that are very specific for your type of work. And at the same time, you inspire them to find new technologies. It's often known that the NASA has also looked at artists to develop other technologies, because you look at things from a different perspective. And there I see indeed the interconnection with others. But I wouldn't like to say that we suddenly will come in. Yeah, there have been tryouts of artists working in companies, and definitely you have number of people who are specialized in that, especially in kind of teamwork, etc. But I think the heart of what people want to do is be able to do still their performances or show their creative work. So yeah, I think that there are opportunities in terms of new jobs going to emerge. We have to invest in that. We need the support of governments to be able to invest in that, because the training programs are not up to date yet. There's still a lot of work to be done for young people, but definitely for those who are in the careers. And yeah, to have also the equipment and everything that surrounds it in order to be able to benefit at its full. So not just kind of schnabels or something like that, but you need to be able to go the full way. So that I think is very important. And like I say, I think we will get much more into integration of the different art forms. That's the way to go. We already have been seeing that also with fashion designers coming in and out, and it will only get more in the future. So people will have, on the one hand, their specialization, but at the same time, they will have different skill sets. And I think we're not going to talk about functions or jobs anymore. We will talk about the different skill sets that you have, and that will make every person unique. And it's very difficult to deal with that as governments. But this is the reality. People are not just one single persons, but or focused on one single thing, but they will be they have different hats and different sets of skills.
Well, thank you so much, Anita. And I think after this last round of interventions, maybe 2021 looks a little bit brighter for me. So that's there is a bit of hope and light there. So I was looking through the questions that our participants were asking, and I think we covered most of them, in fact, through our different interventions. And well, of course, we underlined the diversity of situations across the sectors, and also the all these different crossovers with other sectors, including urban design, for example, well, and the obvious ones with education or health or tourism. And yeah, we spoke quite a lot about the digital side of things, the remote jobs, and well, the broader social impact role of culture in the recovery. So maybe with this, I would like to thank all of our speakers. Thank you so much. And I'll see you in 15 minutes at 3:45 for the next session, which will focus on how, in fact, one can measure cultural employment. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
And see you in 15 minutes, those who will stay with us. Thank you.